Welcome to Stepping Up Kosher, Lesson 5. Now, it's Lesson 5, but it's really Lesson 1. Why? Because over the past 4 weeks, what we have been doing essentially is going through the basics of kosher. Basic kosher concepts. We went through close to 40 of them, and each one, we tried to go through it very briefly, to explain the verse in the Torah from which it comes, to explain the basic parameters of that mitzvah or that concept in kosher. And now we are ready to start going into those concepts in depth. Yes, I can. Marilyn, can you please put some cucumbers on Bina's plate? Is that okay if Marilyn does it? Thank you, Bina. Okay, so now we are going to start going through each of them in depth. All right, so those were all the basic concepts. Now, my hope would be to cover each week about one of them. Until we get to the complicated ones. What do I mean by that? Today, for example, our goal is to cover the laws of separating challah. The mitzvah of making challah, which we're going to talk about as much as we can in 30 minutes. And then that will be today's class about the mitzvah of separating challah, which, as we discussed, is one of the mitzvot. Now, some of these mitzvot are going to be much, much more complicated. Or, I don't know if complicated is the right word. Maybe complicated is the right word, but definitely lengthy. For example, the mitzvah of basar v'chalav, which is a prohibition against mixing meat and milk, is going to be much more nuanced and have many, many more details and ins and outs. And therefore, we're going to leave it for one of the later ones. I know it's one of the ones people are looking forward to, but we're going to leave it for one of the later ones because that is one of the ones that's going to have many, many, many more details in it. What if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? Etc. Now, Avram, I think we have enough chairs. You want to join us by sitting down? Thank you. But today we are going to begin with the mitzvah of separating challah. Okay? So, what is the source for the mitzvah of separating challah? There is a verse in the Torah in Bamidbar, chapter 15, verse 18, Perek Tezvav Pasuk Yud Ches, which says as follows: "B'vayachem el haaretz, when you come to the land, v'ahayan, it will be ba'achalchem milechem haaretz, when you would like to eat of bread of the ground, tarimu teruma laHashem, you should raise up an offering to God. Challah, that's where the word challah comes from. Tarimu teruma ketrumas goren meireshit harisotechem titnu laHashem teruma l'daratechem." From an offering of the silo where they keep the wheat, you should raise up challah from the beginning, from the first of your dough. You should raise up to give to God for all generations. From the Torah, by that he means biblically, there is a mitzvah to separate challah specifically when all Jews are living in the land of Israel. As it says, Bevachem, when you come, meaning when everybody comes, not when only a partial amount of the Jews are living in Israel. And then you bring it to the Kohen, you bring a portion of your dough to the Kohen to eat, and he has to eat it specifically when he's pure. That is the original mitzvah of challah in its purest form. So, you have a Jew living in the year 400 BCE, BCE. Right? So he's living in the times of the Second Temple, or he's living in 800 BC, and he's living in the times of the First Temple. He's in the middle of making a dough at home. All the Jews are living in Israel, right? This is from Joshua, all the Jews living in Israel. He takes a piece, he pinches off a piece of dough, and he takes it and he gives it to the Kohen. Marilyn, could you please pour a cup of water for Bina? Thank you for being my assistant here. Okay, anything you want, you can ask Marilyn, or you can ask Tati, and Tati will ask Marilyn, okay? Yeah. So the Jew would take a piece of dough off, he would bring it to one of the Kohen that was his friend, any local Kohen, and give it to him and say, and by the way, this could have been also a friendly gesture. You were able to go to a Kohen who was your friend, the one you knew from your community, whatever it was, give it to him. That was the original mitzvah of challah. Now, the Chachamim, our sages, added on to this a little bit. In other words, they made a takana that even today, when not all Jews are living in the land of Israel, you have to pinch off a little piece of dough from your dough. And they said even more than that even outside the land of Israel, you should take off a piece of dough. Anybody want to guess why? This is a common theme that you see, that the Chachamim, the sages, one of the things that they constantly do is they take a mitzvah, which really only applied to Jews in the land of Israel, and they say, let's apply it to Jews outside the land of Israel. Anybody want to guess why?
Because you don't want that mitzvah simply to disappear.
Very good, thank you. So we have to remember that for 1,500 years, is usually the number I use, the Jews were living concentrated in Israel, almost nowhere else. during the 1500 years after the destruction of the first temple, there was a whole bunch of Jews that went to Babylon, which is kind of the Iraq area, but they're all living right there. We're not worried about the mitzvah being forgotten. So there's parameters to the mitzvah. If you're in the land of Israel, this is when the mitzvah is done. When you're not, you're not. Right? But then as the diaspora begins, right, especially after the destruction of the second temple, mainly led by a rabbi, his name was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was the leader of the Jewish people as the second temple was being destroyed. A lot of these mitzvahs, the Chachamim say, we're going to add on to them because we don't want them to be forgotten. So today, even outside the land of Israel, we do the mitzvah of Challah in order that this mitzvah should not be forgotten. Now, the fact is that and I know a lot of you are going to be offended by this, but still, all the Challah that we're eating today is all tamei, because we are all. What? I know, right? You don't like that, right? But that's the fact. All Jews outside the land of Israel, even in the land of Israel, all Jews today, because we don't have the waters of the para aduma, of the red heifer, we're in the category of presumably tamei. Presumably we were impure because presumably we came in contact with a dead body, and then from then on you're tamei for the rest of your life until you're sprinkled with the water from the red heifer. You can go to the mikvah, which is step one, which is one step of it. It's a good idea to go to the mikvah on a fairly consistent basis, but for true purity, you have to have the waters of the red heifer. So therefore, any challah that we're taking off today is tamei. So you can't even really give it to a kohen and that he should eat it in a tahor, in a pure way. It's not really going to work. So what do? Instead, we just take that piece of dough, which is supposed to be challah. Remember, it's just a remembrance. We take that dough and we burn it. Okay? So that is the mitzvah of challah as it is today. Now you get the idea. This is the verse from the Torah. This is the original mitzvah, and today this is what the mitzvah looks like. Okay. Right about now.
Just being practical.
Yes.
How much
Oh, that's exactly where we're going. So I'm going to use this as a segue. But Avram wants to ask a question first. Go ahead.
I was wondering all of my life, what is the word kosher come from? Lahachshir or lahachshira?
Kasher means appropriate.
Oh, yeah.
We discussed this in lesson 1 of this course, of this ongoing class. In lesson 1 we said, kashrut is not a mitzvah. Kosher is not a mitzvah. Kosher is over 40 mitzvot. It means kosher means appropriate. Any food that is appropriate for a Jew to eat. As part of that, there are over 40 mitzvot that you have to keep in order for kosher to be.
Has come out to approve.
No, it's a different word. It means appropriate. Okay.
Thank you.
So now, Marilyn asked, she said, let's get into the details, right? The joy is in the details. Judaism is full of details, and here we're going to start getting into them. So the first question Marilyn asked is, what about the size? Right? Now, you're making like this, but I assume you're asking about how much you have to give for challah.
Right.
But we're going to start with even before that. How much dough do you have to give challah from? What if you have a little tiny piece of dough this big? Do you have to take challah from that? So he's going to start. So he says, Isa sheyesh bo kemach, which means dough, a batter, a big portion of dough, a bowl of dough that has in it flour, which means you're not weighing the dough, you're weighing the flour. So it depends how much flour you're putting in. All right? Now, the amount of flour, the minimum amount of flour that you need to have in order to take is what?
5 pounds?
Is 1.6 kilo.
Oh, that's 5. Yeah, it's
Is that about? It is about 5 pounds.
Yeah, yes, about 5 pounds.
Yeah.
Because 1 kilo is 2.2.
Right.
Then another half would be 1.1, whatever. Yeah. So you're close to 5 pounds. 1.667 is the exact amount. Kilo and above. Oh, actually, yeah. Okay. From that and above would be obligated in the mitzvah of separating challah with a bracha. Now, what if you have less than that? So it turns out if you have less than that, but it's above 1.2 kilo, so then you should do the mitzvah of challah, but you don't make a bracha. Let me explain. A bracha, from a Jewish perspective, from a halachic perspective, is a very big deal. Why? Remember, as part of a bracha, we say Baruch Atah, and then we say Hashem's name. If you're doing a mitzvah, beautiful. You're using Hashem's name. You're sanctifying the mitzvah. That's a beautiful thing. But if you're not doing a mitzvah and you're going to say Hashem's name for no reason, that's what the bracha levatel. You're taking Hashem's name in vain. And therefore, we don't want to do that unless we know we're actually doing the mitzvah. So, because between 1.2 and 1.6, and I know we're not getting here into all the background. Trust me, the Talmud has a whole discussion. Why 1.2, why 1.6, etc. Yeah. But if it's above 1.2, you should still do the mitzvah of challah, but you should not make a bracha. If it's above 1.6, then you should make the bracha. Yes?
So like a home baker, for instance, if you're baking your bread.
Absolutely. If you're making a lot of bread. Remember, 1.6
Say
kilo.
you're just making like a loaf of bread, you have your own little baking.
So a loaf is probably going to be less than 1.6 kilo.
Right.
Like a loaf, you made something this small, it's probably going to be less than 1.6 kilo.
So
but
you
if
don't
you're
have to take
making...
challah?
What?
It's about 3.5 pounds.
It doesn't need to be making challah, correct. Very good. Joe is bringing up what?
1.6 kilo would be about 3.5 pounds.
The exact number is 1.667. So maybe you can get that for us. But Joe is bringing up a good point. Challah is a word that has also taken on a cultural significance. When I say challah, most of you think about a little loaf that's braided. That's a challah. But actually, that challah is just a particular cultural bread that we like to eat. The original meaning of the word challah is the mitzvah of separating a piece of dough from your dough to give to God.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about today.
What I meant was
So even if you're making bagels at home, or even if you're making, I don't know, anything else.
If you're making less than that amount, you have to do.
Oh, if you're making less than that amount, like if it's under 1.2, you shouldn't even separate a piece.
Oh, okay.
Okay? But if you're making over that amount, then you should separate a piece without a bracha. And if you're making over 1.6, you should make it with a bracha. Okay. All right. Tina, you're giving her a kush? Okay. Let's move on. Okay. He adds one more detail, which is that this is the minimum amount, even if that's not going to be one loaf. In other words, what if you're a bakery and you're doing Bina, please stop touching her, okay? Stop touching her, please stop good, okay? Kathy's gonna hold her. Okay, what if you're a bakery? You're making 500 loaves of challah. Now each loaf of challah is gonna have way less. It's gonna have, 0.4 of a kilo of flour in it in total, or even less, right? And then, but you're making a massive vat that has, 20 kilo of flour in it, right? Because you're a bakery. It doesn't make a difference. It's about the batch. It's not about the particular loaves. So that was the last thing he wanted to add. Yeah. So, which I think is most people. I'm not aware of anybody that would use 1.667 kilo of flour, mix that into a dough, and then make one challah out of it. Right? That would be a massive challah. Maybe it's for the ones for Shabbat brachot. You know the ones they like to make for simchot. You know the big ones. Maybe those have that much flour in it. But even if not, it still works. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Every pound, how many kilos is it?
I don't know. They were suggesting numbers, I don't know exactly. Okay, now, next question on the table is, what type of dough? Right? So,
Wait.
Yes.
So if it's above 1.6 kilos, then you can make the bracha.
if it's above 1.2, then you should do challah. If it's between 1.2 and 1.6, you should take challah without a bracha. If it's below 1.2, then you shouldn't take challah at all, because it's below the minimum amount.
Okay.
Ready? Yes?
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay. Now, what type of dough? Right? So that's the next question. So he says, any dough that comes from the 5 types of grain, and we're going to cue BZ to tell us what the type of grains are. So he says browse, B-R-O-W-S. That's the mnemonic that we came up with here.
Mnemonic.
So it's barley, rye, oats, spelt, and wheat. Wheat and spelt. That's the 5 grains. So any from those 5 grains. Why? Because those are the types of grains that when you take them, it turns into a thick dough, and then you use them, you bake it inside an oven. Now, even if you take that type of dough, which is usually baked in an oven, and now you're going to use it, let's say, by deep frying it, or by frying it, or anything like that, still, you have to take challah from it, but, and you still make a bracha. Okay. Now, what if the dough that you're making is actually going to be used for something that's much more runny? I think I've always wondered what the difference is between the word dough and batter. I think the difference is that batter is usually a much more runny substance, no? Certainly colloquially. I don't know if that's the official difference. Now, what if you're going to do that? So, for example, let's say you're making a kugel, right? It's got lots of flour in it. Maybe you're making a massive batch of kugel because you're a caterer and you're making 50 kugels, and you're using that amount of flour. Or you're making krepla. Krepla are like little, doughy outside, but something inside. A knish, a bureka. You're making all these things, danishes, etc. Right? Lakshan, which is pasta. What do you make any of these things? Right? So in these instances, the correct thing to do. Now, I don't think any of you are doing this at home. The amount of flour. The amount of product that you would need to be producing, let's say it's kugel, the amount of kugel you would need to be making to have 1.6 kilo of flour in it would be an insane amount. But for a caterer, for example, if they're, and it has to be done in one batch, remember, right? So if that is the case, you should, he says, it really is appropriate to take challah from it, even in such a situation, but you shouldn't make a bracha on it, because it's not really just dough.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it has to be just dough. make it look.
No, it has to have enough flour. Oh, you're saying in order to make a bracha? Yes, it has to be just a bread, not a cook, something you're cooking, pastry or something like that. Okay. The same thing if you're making mizonot bread. What is mizonot bread? So what?
Like pizza, huh?
Well, but that's even bread. That's mizonot. How do you make mizonot bread? You make mizonot bread by putting in instead of water, right? Normally bread is flour and water, and then whatever else you add. But what's if you make it not with water, but you make it with a juice, let's say with orange juice, apple juice, etc., right? Which then it changes the bracha to mizonot, which is the whole different discussion. We'll talk about it a different time. So again, in such a situation, again, you still need
Like beer bread.
I don't think beer bread is a good example. No, I think beer bread has water in it. The beer has a ton of water in it, so I think that's considered like beer bread is hamotzi. It's not
Juice
mizonot.
also has water in it.
Juice has
I think if you're
water.
making enough beer bread, then the beer bread would be you would have to take challah from it with a bracha. I think.
In the beer, there
One
is
second,
one-
let me just finish with the point that I'm smacking over. But if you're making something that's mezonot, so you're making it with fruit juice instead of with water, so then you take challah, but you don't make a bracha. Okay, if you are going to do something else other than baking with it, then you don't take challah at all. So let's say you're making kreplach, right, or donuts. Is a good example. Donuts, right, or bagels. They deep fry them. So bagels, I guess, is another good example, right. So in these instances, you don't. It's patur. It's absolved from the mitzvah of challah. Okay.
Why do
So if you
you
boil it,
What? Because you're boiling it or frying it. That's a different form, right? The original mitzvah of challah is for baking, not for boiling or frying. Yes, Avram, you had a question?
I was wanted. I forgot what I wanted to ask.
Okay, Joe, you had a question?
So like a bagel, even though it ends up being baked.
Well, if it's baked, it depends what type of bagel it is. If it's a baked bagel, so then you do have to make a bracha. You do have to take challah and make a bracha.
Okay. So
When I say a bagel, what I mean is a lot of bagels are boiled or fried.
They're boiled and then usually baked.
If they're baked afterwards, then that's considered baking. That would be the difference. Okay, so any bread that's baked, you have to do it with a bracha. If it's not baked, then you don't make a bracha. Okay, we move along.
Yes.
Next detail. I don't have the time with me. I'm trying to see what that. Oh, there we go. I have it in here. Okay, perfect. The next detail we are going to do is I want to talk about the significance of this mitzvah and women, right? Because I'm sure that many of you, when you think of challah, you think of women's challah bakes. You think of the woman making challah in the home, etc. Now, technically, the mitzvah of challah is for anybody. I mean, if I'm at home and I'm baking challah, I have to do it as well. So how did this become a woman's mitzvah? So it turns out there are 3 mitzvah that have a specific connection with women. The origin of this comes from Tractate Shabbat in the Talmud. Nachum, you want to tell Mommy that Leah's probably hungry and she's ready to eat? Thank you. Okay, let me see when she's going to give it to you. Okay. So in Tractate Shabbat, let me give you the exact source. In chapter 2, in the 6th Mishnah, the Mishnah tells us that there are 3 mitzvot that have a very specific connection with women. And they are, anybody want to give me the list? What's the list? Baking challah is one of them. What's the other one?
Candles.
Lighting Shabbat candles and
family purity.
family purity. Very good. The laws of Nida, which is today we know as mikvah, but it's obviously all the laws that go along together with it. Now, what is the specific connection between of these mitzvot? These mitzvot specifically have a connection, spiritually speaking, with rectifying the sin of the tree of knowledge. Chava's part in it, Eve's part in it. Remember, the sin of the tree of knowledge began with Eve telling Adam to eat from the tree of knowledge. Obviously, it started from the snake, and each one has their form of rectification. And for women specifically, these 3 mitzvot help with rectifying that for that sin, which is what brought about death to the world, right? For all humanity. Humanity was supposed to live forever, and then instead we only live limited lives. That comes from then. As the words of Rabbi Yossi are with regards to the mitzvah of Challah, he says, Hashem created the person afar min ha'adama, earth from the ground. Right, just like somebody who takes challah from a dough. So just like from dough, you take a piece of dough and you form from that a bread out of it. And you turn it into a bread. You create, so to speak, bread out of it. Similarly, it's a similar action to the way that God took dirt from the ground and created with that Adam. He made Adam with it. Okay. It is a good
When I
custom.
was a child, I used to make mud pies.
Mud pies. There you go. Very good. Mud pies is literally. Okay, so this is the Jewish mud pie. How's that?
She has to be a wife of the rabbi.
What?
She has to be wife of the rabbi. She knows a lot.
She has to be a wife of a rabbi.
Like a,
Do you know a rabbi that you can marry?
I said that she knows more than the rabbi.
Thank you. It is a good custom that women should bake challah in honor of Shabbat. That also comes from Shulchan Aruch, from the Jewish Code of Law, that a woman should bake challah in honor of Shabbat. In the amount, which is a lot, right? It's very hard if you have a very small family. Let's say you're just a couple, or you have one kid or two kids, a small family. You're baking challah to have enough to do the mitzvah of challah. You have to make a whole bunch of challahs. So the solution usually is the women do it one time and for the next 3 weeks or something, right? Or you could have a lot of guests, or you could give it out to people in Pasadena. And that's what I do, and it's very successful. People enjoy getting challah if they don't make it home. Anyways, but there is a custom that women should do this specifically every. Sure. I think she's very, very hungry. So I can get the here, and she was going to give it to you. Thank you, then. So it is a good custom for women to bake challah every single Erev Shabbos, every Friday, in order that they should be able to do the mitzvah of challah. So this comes to Joe's point, what he was saying earlier. The challah is a roll. What do you mean? That's where the name challah came culturally for this roll.
Friday specifically, because sometimes I'll bake it another day, like on a Thursday.
Ideally, it should be done. No. Friday the day, no. But Erev Shabbos, meaning in honor of Shabbos. You can do it on Thursday and do it, in honor of Shabbos. That's fine.
Okay.
Now, in this mitzvah, there is a tremendous zechut, there is a tremendous merit, which we learn about in that same Mishnah in Tractate Shabbat, for easy birth and for peaceful birth. And this is, you're starting to see the connection with the woman, right? We learned already that it's connected to the woman, but here we're starting to see that all the benefits that a woman is looking for, the brachas, the blessings that a woman is looking for in their lives, come through the challah through this time. It is appropriate before baking challah. Let's see all the women together. What do we do right before we bake challah? We give tzedakah.
Yeah, that's right.
Before any one of the mitzvah that a woman does, to give tzedakah, and there are those that even wash their hands without a blessing. You don't make al netilat tonight, but wash their hands before they do the mitzvah in order to do the mitzvah with pure hands. Okay? Who is it that's supposed to do it? As we said, our sages taught us that this mitzvah is appropriate for the woman, and therefore, always a woman should, if there's an instance where bread is being made, even, let's say, for example, I decide at home I'm going to bake bread, and I make myself nazir, Gitti should come and do the mitzvah of challah. A woman should come and do the mitzvah. She should, if at all possible, a woman should do that mitzvah, and then, if not, then a man. Okay. It should be specifically a grown person, man or woman. Hello. Okay. It should specifically be done by a grown person. There's a question here. I'm trying to look at it. Oh, it's just somebody saying they're watching. Meaning, for a boy over the age of 13 and for a girl over the age of 12. And if a child did it under that age, then it doesn't count. The mitzvah of challah doesn't count, and a grown person needs to do. So let's say, for example, I'm at home, I'm making a big thing, and Menachem comes over to me and tells me, "Hey, I already took challah from it." It doesn't count because he's not over bar mitzvah, and or bina or whatever. Right? It has to be done by somebody who's over the age of bar mitzvah. When is the right time to do the mitzvah of separating challah? The appropriate time to do it is after you already kneaded it, right? And it became dough. In other words, you can't take from the flour and say, "Oh, this is going to be my challah." But it also needs to be done before it's baked. You can't take after the baked bread, take a piece and say, "This is for challah." Why? Because the words in the Torah are Reshit Arisotechem, which means the beginning of your dough, the first of your dough. The word arisa is dough. When it's still flour, it's not arisa. When it's already bread, it's no longer arisa. Okay. Okay, now the one exception to this is, anybody know? The one exception to this is when you make matzah. When you make matzah for Pesach, if you're going to start taking challah, which means, I know people are probably having a hard time with those words, like challah is chametz, right? No. If you're going to start taking away a piece of the dough, from the dough that's going to be made into matzah, if you're going to do that after it's already made into dough, remember, then you're on a clock. Within 18 minutes, within less than 18 minutes, it has to go from all the way into the oven and come out of the oven, right? So be fully baked. So therefore, they separate it beforehand. I'm sorry, they take it afterwards. Sorry. They take it afterwards, after it's already baked, and not when it is a dough. Yes. You had a question?
What do you mean They can't just like take a piece of dough and then bake
They
the rest
could,
in
but
18 minutes.
they could, but because it would add extra unnecessary pressure, so therefore the customer, the appropriate time to do it is afterwards. Once it's already baked, you take a piece of matzah or a full matzah from your batch, and you say this one is challah. All right. Okay, how much should you take? Now, I think this was your question. So we discussed the minimum amount of how much dough there needs to be in order to require the mitzvah of challah. Right? But the next question is, how much do you need to take from that dough? So according to the minimum amount of the law, even a tiny drop counts, taking even a tiny piece. But the customer is going to take at least the size of an olive. Yeah. Now, an interesting law with regards to this is, you would think somebody would get really excited, right? I'm sure there are many women here that are thinking, size of an olive, I always do bigger than that. Like it's for God. You don't want to take a tiny little piece, right? So you take a nice big chunk. So now, let's take this all the way to the extreme. How about if somebody decides, hey, I'm going to make a dough. The whole dough will be for God. Turns out that if you do that, actually you don't fulfill the mitzvah of challah. No. Because the mitzvah of challah is to take a little bit from the dough that you're making bread out of. If you just made the whole dough and give the whole thing to God, it's actually not the mitzvah of challah.
Okay, it's a different mitzvah.
What?
Maybe it's a different
Yeah, it might be a nice gesture. I don't know. I'm sure if it's done with a pure heart, Hashem appreciates everything, right? When a person serves Hashem with a pure heart. Let's talk about the bracha.
So
Before
you can take off an olive.
size of an olive, yeah.
The size of an olive? Yeah. But what's the maximum then?
We just said, maximum is that you have to leave over for you to make a bread. Isn't
Okay,
it?
it just has to be
Yeah.
an olive size.
A minimum olive size. Okay, how do you go about this? So you have the big dough, it's finished rising, it's a big, right? I mean, it doesn't need to be finished rising. At any point after it's a dough, before it's baked, you have a big dough, you take off a piece. Nope, not yet. Don't take off a piece yet. Before you take off the piece, that's when we make a bracha. The bracha is, Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you, our God, Elokeinu melech haolam, our Lord, King of the universe, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, who has sanctified us with his commandments, v'tzivanu, and commanded us to, lehafrish challah, to separate a piece of challah. After that, you take off a little piece. You don't make a hefsek, you don't make an interruption between the bracha and taking off the piece. And after you finish, after you take off the piece, you hold the piece of dough in your hand and you say, Harezu challah, this is challah. You do not need to make this bracha standing. If you want, you can be sitting with this bracha. And if you took off a piece without the bracha, you could still make the bracha right after you separated. Like let's say you took off a piece, you forgot to make the bracha. But if you already said Harezu challah, if you already said this piece is a piece of challah, so then you already fulfilled your obligation, and now that's it. The mitzvah is over, you can't make a bracha anymore. So the appropriate order, let's recap, is first make a bracha, then take off a piece, say Harezu challah, and then you're done the mitzvah.
How long does it bake the same time as the bread? Because it's not burnt.
You're doing great. You're doing great at asking the questions that are literally going into the next thing. So we're not baking, we're burning. Remember, originally you're supposed to give it to the kohen, right? But instead of baking, you're supposed to burn it. So the custom is to burn the piece of challah that we separated, but you should be careful not to burn it together with the actual thing that you're baking. So, for example, let's say you're going to bake your challah in this oven, and if you only have one oven at home, wait and burn the piece of challah a different time. Put it in your freezer. Maybe even collect them. That's what we used to do in our house. We used to collect 20, 30 of them. Ideally, we used to burn them together with the chametz, which we'll talk about in a second. But
for a whole year, you can keep a frozen.
Yeah, sure. Frozen piece of dough in your freezer. Yeah, a lot of people have the custom to burn it together with biur chametz, which is when you burn the chametz on Erev Pesach, you take 50 pieces of dough, small pieces. Right? This is where it starts to get more practical to take a small piece, not to take too big of a piece, and then they burn it together with the chametz. But even if not, if you only have one oven in your house, unless you're going to burn it in the oven. Right? So, you shouldn't burn it together in the oven at the same time that the regular challah is baking.
Oh, I was doing that.
Okay? So that's why you come to Stepping Up Kosher. You can put it down as your personal takeaway. From now on, I'm going to... All right? Okay, no problem. I'm just saying, that's
How do you burn it?
You could if you want to, you could just put it in the oven. Just leave it till it burns. You've never burned a cake before? Usually we do it unintentionally. This is easy.
You could put in
A piece of foil. Yeah.
You fold it, and you cover it, and then you put it in the oven, or you put it in the barbecue, or whatever.
Yeah, on the grill. Put it anywhere that it's going to burn.
Probably on top of the stove it would be faster.
On top of the stove.
I mean, on the stovetop.
It's gonna smell.
Yeah, I feel like that's it's not so practical. There's no official way. You can burn it however you want.
Why has to be faster? What has to be? Since he's saying faster, I don't know.
Because she wants to get it done. She wants it done. Faster. Now, why are you not allowed to bake it in the oven at the same time? Because then some of the taste from the challah, this challah is God's. You're not allowed to enjoy it. You're not allowed to eat it. So you don't want the taste from the piece of challah that's the dough that you separated for God. You don't want that to go into the thing that you're baking. So therefore, it has to be done
Well,
separately.
could you put it on another pan and just leave it in there longer than the bread?
No. It has to be done separately in a separate shift. It can't be done at the same time because then some of the taste will transfer over.
Okay, yeah.
Where did I just see?
It wouldn't
That,
transfer over because you take it all
in Rambam, in the daily cycle of Rambam, where we're studying Rambam, we were just doing the laws of Yom Tov. Now Yom Tov is different than Shabbat, because on Yom Tov you're allowed to cook and you're allowed to bake, right? But you're not allowed to bake on Yom Tov if you own a bakery. You're not allowed to bake on Yom Tov, right? Let's say on Sukkot, right? You're gonna be like, oh, you're allowed to cook on Shabbat, so I'm gonna bake now 1,000 donuts. Like that, as soon as Yom Tov is over, I'll be ready to get donuts, people. Not because you're doing business, that's a whole separate issue, but you could not do the business on you could do the business afterwards, right? Why are you not allowed to bake that on Yom Tov? Because you're not baking for Yom Tov. You're baking for Monday, for Tuesday, whatever it is, for the next
You
day.
can bake on Yom Tov?
On Yom Tov, you're allowed to bake. There's certain ways that you're allowed to, only from a pre-existing flame, and one of the other details is that it has to be for the holiday itself. Now, so, these rules are very fluid. The rules with regards to Yom Tov are very fluid. What do I mean? One of the laws that it said in Rambam, and I just noticed yesterday, so that's why, and I think this goes to your point that you're saying, one of the laws in Rambam is that you're actually allowed to bake 10 loaves of bread, even if 9 of them you're going to eat after Yom Tov. Why? Because it turns out that baking 1 loaf of bread in an oven has one taste. It's only the taste of that loaf of bread. And when you bake 10 loaves of I didn't know this, I'm reading this in Rambam, I'm not a baker. But apparently when you bake 10 loaves at the same time, there's a deeper flavor that goes into the bread. So it turns out that all 10 loaves that you're baking really are all for Yom Tov. Why? Because the 1 loaf is going to be much better for Yom Tov. Yeah, for the holiday. The other 9 will then be for, it's leftovers. It was just used to add the flavor. And then you're going to eat them on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, whenever it is. Why do I say this? I say this because from that
at the
loaf,
same time, 9 loaves in one oven?
whatever it is, baking more loaves of bread in an oven at the same time adds flavor to each loaf, apparently. It's a better loaf of bread if you bake a whole bunch. I didn't know this. I learned this in the Rambam yesterday. Why do I share this? I share this because it teaches us that what you're suggesting, which is, why can't we just burn the piece of challah, just leave it in there for longer than the loaf of bread that I'm making, right? The reason is because then the challah will be enhancing the bread that you're making. And you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to enjoy it. That's not allowed. So that's why it has to be burned separately at a separate time or in a separate oven. If you cannot burn it for whatever reason, you can double wrap it and throw it in the trash. Okay. With this, we will end today's lesson, even though really there's other details we can get into, like what if somebody has a certain amount of dough for challah, and then he adds flour afterwards, right? So do you have to take challah again, etc., right? We start to get into it. If you're adding another 1.2 kilos, then you might have to do it again, right? We can get into other details, such as what if you lost a piece of challah? Do you have to do it again, right? What about separating challah on Shabbat or Yom Tov, right? So you made your dough beforehand, and let's say it's Yom Tov. You're going to bake challah. You're going to bake bread with it. Are you allowed to separate it on? So lots of different details that with each of these situations you can ask a rabbi, and they will give you the exact answer to each of these cases. But I feel like we covered at least the details of how to do the mitzvah of challah, the how much, the why, the when, the who, etc. And with this, we will conclude today's lesson of Stepping Up Kosher. And thank you all for joining us, and have a great day.